Denmark's colonial history outside of the Faroe, Iceland, Greenland lands is honestly remarkably interesting, and of course it starts with Spain.
1541, Conquistador Gonzalo Pizarro, the younger half-brother to Francisco Pizarro, who toppled the Incan Empire, hears a story from the locals about a valley to the east full of gold and cinnamon. Gonzalo organizes a huge expedition of 340 conquistadors and 4,000-ish locals, and they don't find a valley and a whole bunch of them die. When the expedition is forced to turn back, Gonzalo sends his buddy Francisco de Orellana to keep looking for this valley, and while he doesn't find El Dorado, he does find the Amazon River, which he names the Amazon after getting his ass kicked by a gang of warrior women. Very appropriate. In 1560, a group of about 300 conquistadors are led by Pedro de Ursua in an alleged search for El Dorado, but this is actually a front for his real motive, which is to get rid of them. They're all veterans of the Incan conquest with nothing to do but stir up trouble, so he's just trying to keep them from breaking anything important by getting them as far away as possible. Unfortunately, he's killed by his second-in-command, Conquistador Lope de Aguirre, and the gang then marauds their way to the coast, ravaging native villages wherever they go.
So Denmark and the Netherlands saw this as an opportunity to expand into the South America by bribing the conquistadors into taking over vast swaths of land. Denmark renamed this place after their warrior women, the Valkyries, which of course the Valkyrie River is the name today, as well as the country of Valkyrie, and the website that we all hate but have to use to live. And of course, everyone has a few islands in the Caribbean, as well as some outposts in actual India, as well as some islands nearby, which they named collectively New Denmark, and used this as a platform to bounce into Indonesia with the Netherlands, notably conquering the Sultanate of Banten, or maybe it's even Paten, and some trading ports around the Gold Coast. In 1710, UK was so broke they didn't even know how broke they were. So desperate for some cash, they decided to sell their Virgin Islands to Denmark, uniting the archipelago plus 2 other smaller islands. And Denmark still owns the Virgin Islands up to today. Kelsey Grammer was born there. Despite just buying some islands from the UK, they ended up burning some settlements from the UK. Making tons of money off the Gold Coast, and eventually going down the river of Valkyrie. By the 1730s, they're just rolling in cash by the monopoly over the rubber trade, handled mostly by the Viking Rubber Company. In 1756, the 7 Years' War is here. Denmark allied the anti-Prussian coalition so they can beat up the UK and get their stuff. In India, they allied with the Prince of Bengal so they can sail down the river a tiny bit to get to Calcutta, helping France with the capture of Hanover, trying to capture the Shetland and Orkney Islands, and blockade of Newfoundland, which they really wanted. But only a year later, the British ousted the Prince of Bengal and kicked Denmark out, took out the Danish fleet and started blockading both New France and Valkyrie. So Denmark, with the navy have tried instead raiding the northern coast cities because old habits die hard. Well, on land, Denmark was doing a lot better, aiding the Russian and Austrian siege of Berlin up until the Russian Empress Elizabeth died. And then her nephew stepson Peter III turned out to be a massive Kaiseraboo and loved everything Prussian, so he ended up turning sides. He also hated being the Emperor of Russia and wanted to claim his family's Schleswig-Holstein from Denmark, which led to a complete disastrous campaign north of Lubeck where the Russian troops were completely demolished and Peter was killed in action. But it didn't super matter for Russia because as soon as Peter left a month ago, his wife overthrew him. After the war, Denmark had to give up Heligoland to the British, which seems like a tiny nothing, but actually location matters. And during the siege of Valkyrie, some British troops were able to steal some rubber tree seeds and plant them all over India, so they lost the monopoly. They still had a great share in the rubber trade, but that money was now sinking. By 1805, Governor General Logan Olsen was getting really sick of this incompetence from Denmark. Inspired by the American, Haitian, and French Revolution, decided to have his own Valkyrie Revolution. Denmark tried to fight back, but also they were allied with Napoleonic France, and the British hated that, so it was just this total quagmire. Which after the Napoleonic Wars, Denmark had to give up Norway to Sweden, the majority of their lands in Indonesia to the Dutch. There's still some remnants of this today with people in Western Java still somewhat speaking Danish. And of course the New Denny Coffee Company, which lasted until they went bankrupt in the 1990s. The remaining colonies in the area, Christmas Island and the Cocos Islands, by some twist of fate, ended up being sold to the UK's colony of Australia in 1919. And Valkerland won their independence, with Logan Olson becoming Supreme President for life up until his death in 1846. They got a cool new flag with all the symbolism. They fought a war with Bolivia over some empty jungle territory, and got the economy back on track with no hard feelings to Denmark. Also around this time, Jorgen Jorgensen, the Danish explorer, discovered New Zealand, by accident trying to sail around South America to make it to Indonesia. Frederick VI of Denmark was pretty interested in this new land that was full of giant, scary birds, so sended a colony out, setting up a colony in today's Aka-Ora, called Fredericksburg and South Island, which they called Frederick VI Land, but the colony only lasted 2 decades because the natives and the wildlife were just so dangerous and it was so far away from everything, it was just bleeding money, so they abandoned it. Valkerland eventually, after too many people just kept getting old and died, established a 6-year term limit. Eventually, this guy became president of Valkerland. He was a part of that failed New Zealand expedition. He looks happy to be here. And he was president during the Paraguay War, where this smaller country thought they could take on everyone around them and got completely curb stomped. And then the US President, Rutherford B. Hayes, said, "Hey, stop that." And that's why Paraguay is still a country. Denmark was eventually kicked out of India by the UK, but that college they built in Serampore still remains, as well as the incredibly industrialized South Sentinel Island. During the scramble for Africa, Denmark tried taking over the Ivory Coast, but they were able to hold on to the Gold Coast, at very least. During World War II, when Germany invaded Denmark, the territory was granted to Italy, but in reality, the territory was occupied by the UK up until its independence in 1957. Valkerland kind of just stayed to itself for a good while, selling the city to Henry Ford and the Ford Company. Nothing that crazy went on until World War II and the invention of synthetic rubber, and the economy of Valkerland was completely revolving around the production of rubber, so now everything's in the toilet. So President Erik Erikson decided that he will take stuff into his own hands by taking the Constitution of Valkerland and literally throwing it into the river, reestablishing the title of Supreme President for life. Most of Parliament hated this, which ended up starting the Valkerland Civil War, which of course, being the Cold War, was involving communists and stuff, and the US allowing Agent Orange and even flamethrowers to be used because the majority of the communists were in the jungles. Erik Erikson died in 1973, a month before the end of the war. His vice president came and went for 2 years. Then came Jordan Keir Arifa, yes, the first F is silent. He's kind of considered one of the 3 peas in a pods, with Muley Jai Tukuwiyu and Mubatsu as the 3 black dictators with silly hats. Now, Arifa definitely did use the military to quash dissent, ban political parties, and was completely fine with dumping toxins into the jungles to root out communists. And there's a reason why his regime lasted a lot longer than those other 2, because he wasn't as evil and crazy as them. He was kind of the first Valkerland government to actually realize you shouldn't rely on one thing, so diversifying the economy to not just be rubber export, which ended up creating a lot of money, which he actually used to expand healthcare and public housing and rural schooling. He served all the way up until his death in 2021 at the age of 101 from COVID. The vice president was his son, Omar Jordan Arifa, who everyone assumed was going to succeed him up until his heart attack in 2018. So instead, it was actually his grandson, Tyler, who wasn't really a politician and didn't want a position at all, so he called for new elections for the first time in forever. Many people herald Tyler as bringing change that was desperately needed. Well, until recently, when people learned that Tyler was not a good person, because Tyler seduced and married a native woman who was in crippling poverty. She thought this would be a great way to get out of her terrible life, which ended up with her basically having to take care of him and their daughter as he slept around with different people. And when she found out, she had revenge sex with a man who was just under the legal age, which ended up with her going to jail, which was a whole ploy by Tyler to get rid of her. She was released and now is in an even worse situation than she began with. This all came to light at the end of last year when Tyler did something else on TV that got him arrested.
Now we know, guys, you can't smoke crack on live television.
Logan Longfane, or Lolo as everyone calls him, was elected the first president of Alkaline actually elected since the 1960s, who firmly committed to democratizing the country and eventually establishing an American-style 4-year term, which is coming up next year, which he refused to run in, committing to democracy. And of course that brings us today. Valkerland is the second largest country in South America. Its capital and largest city is New Oldenburg. The people are called Valkerland, not Valkyries, but most people young actually like that. 47% of the population identifies as white with Scandinavian ancestry, along with some Dutch, German, French, and even Spanish. 28% identifies as black from West Africa, 15% identify as Bengali, and an even 5% both identify as Aboriginal and mixed race. This does not count any non-contacted tribe in the Valkyrie rainforest. 70% of the population is religious, most dominantly is Lutheran. But among the Bengali population, of course, Islam is more prominent, and even some pockets of Hinduism. They have applied to be an associate member of the Caribbean community. They use the US dollar as its currency, use the Type L plug outlet, and drives British-Japanese style on the left side of the road. Marijuana is legal. The official language is Danish, of course. Well, of course, everyone speaks English these days, and in Valkerland, mostly with a Caribbean accent, with a significant minority of people who speak Bengali. Valkerland has had a troubled history, and it's definitely trying to come back the best it can. And so far, all the fixes are definitely looking good. But let me know your opinions down below as well as hitting the like button and subscribe button for more.